Picture this. Across 12 star systems, the galaxy's most feared warriors are about to learn that the deadliest weapon in the universe isn't forged from steel or powered by antimatter. It's carried in the mind of a human professor who's never thrown a punch in her life. When Dr. Kessa Thorne draws a simple chalk line on the floor of an alien arbitration chamber and calmly tells the galaxy's apex predators to cross it and see what happens, she's not bluffing. She's about to demonstrate why humans don't need claws, fangs, or plasma cannons to dominate the food chain. We just need to understand exactly how everyone else uses theirs. Before we continue the story, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe to HFY Havoc, hit the bell, and like this video. Because if you want more epic HFY sci-fi stories like this one, you don't want to miss out. Today's tale is about the moment the galaxy discovered that anthropology isn't just a boring academic field. It's humanity's secret superweapon, and we've been studying you all along. The neutral arbitration platform hung in space like a metallic tumor, all jutting angles and diplomatic pretension. Ambassador Kessa Thorne stepped off the human transport with the measured gait of someone who had spent 30 years walking into rooms where she was the least impressive person present. This particular room, however, took that concept and ran a marathon with it. "Behold," rumbled Vextar the Bone Crusher, whose species had evolved from something that looked like a cross between a rhinoceros and a particularly aggressive filing cabinet. "The humans send us their librarian." The assembled delegates, 12 species, each more magnificently armed than the last, erupted in what passed for laughter across the galaxy. The Catherian representative clicked her mandibles in amusement, while the crystalline Zephyrians chimed like broken wind chimes. Even the usually stoic hegemony observers were making those grinding sounds that meant they found something funny. Kessa adjusted her plain gray jacket and consulted a tablet that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts. "Dr. Kessa Thorne, Department of Comparative Cultural Studies, Terra University. I'm here regarding the Kepler 442 territorial dispute." "Studies," wheezed Gorath of the Blood Tide, whose people had conquered half their home galaxy before breakfast was invented. "What do you study, little human? The mating habits of space fungi?" "Warfare, actually." Kessa pulled out a piece of chalk. Actual chalk, the kind that hadn't been used on Earth for 3 centuries, and drew a neat line across the obsidian floor. "There. Anyone who wants Earth's claim to the system is welcome to cross that line." The laughter stopped. 12 sets of alien eyes, optical clusters, and sensory organs focused on the thin white mark with the intensity of a supernova. "Is this some human ritual?" asked Zek Prime, the Catherian whose blade arms could slice through battleship hulls. "A ceremonial challenge?" "It's a line," Kessa said, settling into one of the viewing chairs as if she were about to watch a mildly interesting documentary. "Cross it if you want to contest our claim." Vextar snorted, sending small puffs of steam from his nostrils. "You mock us with this display. Where are your weapons? Your combat augmentations? Your death-sworn champions?" "Don't have any." Kessa pulled out a thermos and poured herself what smelled like coffee. "Don't believe in them." The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for the moment before a supernova decides whether to implode or just ruin everyone's day. Gorath's tentacles writhed in what might have been confusion or fury. With his species, the two emotions looked remarkably similar. "You cannot be serious!" Zek Prime advanced toward the line, her blade arms catching the artificial starlight. "The arbitration protocols clearly state that territorial disputes must be settled through combat trial. You appear to have brought a beverage. And excellent coffee it is, too." Kessa took a sip. "Ethiopian blend, grown in lunar greenhouses. Amazing what happens when you give plants 16-hour days." "This is madness," declared Mordoon of the Eclipse Fleet, whose people had perfected the art of ending arguments by ending the people making them. "The humans cannot simply refuse to engage. The law demands—" "The law," Kessa interrupted, consulting her tablet, "states that territorial disputes will be resolved through combat trial between designated champions of each claiming party. It doesn't specify what constitutes combat, what defines victory, or require that champions be armed." She looked up with the sort of smile that made professors dangerous. "I've read the fine print, all of it, 3 times. Vextar stepped forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. "You think your legal technicalities will save you? When the trial begins, we will tear you apart like wet paper. You're welcome to try." Kessa gestured towards the line. "Right there, whenever you're ready." The alien delegates exchanged glances that ranged from bewildered to homicidal. The hegemony observer, a floating mass of geometric shapes that somehow conveyed bureaucratic annoyance, pulsed with dim light. "Human representative," it intoned in a voice like grinding gears, "your behavior is unprecedented in galactic arbitration history." "Thank you." Kessa made a note on her tablet. "I do try to be thorough." Zek Prime's mandibles clacked rapidly. "This is some human trick, some deception we do not understand." "No trick," Kessa said, pulling out a worn paperback book and opening it to a bookmarked page. "Just waiting for someone to cross the line." Gorith's tentacles curled into fighting positions. "And when we do? Then you'll see what happens when you underestimate someone who's spent her entire career studying how people kill each other." Kessa turned a page. "But please don't let me rush you. I brought reading material." The book's title was visible now. Asymmetric Warfare in Pre-Industrial Societies, a Comprehensive Analysis. Several of the alien delegates leaned forward to read it, their expressions shifting from amusement to something approaching concern. Morden of the Eclipse Fleet was the first to speak. "You study warfare, but claim never to have held a weapon?" "I study everything," Kessa said, without looking up from her book. "How the Catherian blade dance evolved from mating rituals. Why Gorith's people always attack in prime-numbered wave formations. The mathematical relationships between Vextar's bone-crushing techniques and his species' pack-hunting psychology." She finally looked up, her eyes moving from one delegate to another. "The question is, do any of you study yourselves?" The chamber fell silent, except for the gentle hum of life support systems and the sound of Kessa turning pages. The line remained unbroken, pristine white against the black floor, as 12 of the galaxy's most feared species stared at it like it might suddenly sprout teeth. "Well?" Kessa asked, not bothering to look up from her book. "The trial period has officially begun. The floor is yours." None of them moved toward the line. 3 parsecs away, aboard the flagship of the Hegemony Monitoring Fleet, Admiral Quexry pulled up archived footage on his command console. His subordinates gathered around, their collective confusion palpable as they watched decades of similar encounters. "Here," Quexry indicated with one of his 4 arms, "the Proxima Centauri incident, 47 standard years ago. The humans sent a poet." The holographic display showed a frail, elderly woman facing down the Curvan Horde's greatest berserker. She had defeated him by reciting limericks that somehow caused him to laugh so hard he collapsed from oxygen deprivation. "And the Vega Station crisis," Quexry continued, switching feeds. "They sent a chef. This time, a portly man in an apron had ended a 3-way territorial war by preparing a meal so extraordinary that the warring factions spent 6 months arguing over who deserved to eat it first. By then, human colonists had already established legal residence. Back in the arbitration chamber, Zek Prime was accessing her own data banks, her optical processors whirring as she sifted through intelligence reports. "Curious pattern," she muttered to Vextar. 73% of human diplomatic victories have involved representatives with no military background whatsoever. "Coincidence," Vextar grunted, but his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself more than her. "Statistical anomaly." Meanwhile, Kessa had produced a small notebook and was making sketches while observing their formations. Her drawing skills were apparently as unremarkable as everything else about her. Stick figures would have shown more artistic merit. Gorith's research tendrils had accessed the Galactic intelligence network, and what he found made his chromatophores shift to the deep purple that indicated existential dread. "The Battle of Wolf 359, he announced to no one in particular. The humans sent an accountant. An accountant defeated the Crimson Brotherhood's death fleet by calculating the exact fuel consumption required for their attack formations, and then redirecting their supply ships." "That was clever," Morden admitted grudgingly. "Brutal, but clever." "The accountant never fired a shot." Gorith's tentacles twitched. "She bankrupted an entire military operation using spreadsheets." Kessa looked up from her notebook. "Oh, you found that one? Marvelous work, really. I use it as a case study in my asymmetric resource manipulation course." She returned to her sketching. "Though I prefer the incident at Kepler 186. The humans sent a kindergarten teacher." The chamber temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Even the artificial gravity felt heavier. "What happened at Kepler 186? Zek Prime's voice carried the sort of careful neutrality used when asking about particularly virulent plagues. "The teacher organized the warring factions into a game of galactic hopscotch," Kessa said, still drawing. "Kept them so busy arguing about the rules that they forgot why they were fighting. By the time they figured it out, the disputed territory had achieved independent status and joined the neutral zones." She held up her notebook, displaying a remarkably accurate tactical diagram of their current positions. Every delegate's location, movement patterns, and probable attack vectors were mapped out with disturbing precision. "Fascinating defensive postures you've all adopted," she observed. "Very telling. Vextar's people always form a crescent when uncertain, leftover pack behavior from when they hunted in family groups. Gorith maintains equidistant spacing from all potential threats, classic deepwater predator instincts. And Zek Prime ... She tilted her head. "You've positioned yourself for maximum mobility while maintaining proximity to exits. Your species really doesn't like prolonged confrontations, does it?" Zek Prime's mandibles went very still. "You are observing us." "I observe everyone." Kessa flipped to a fresh page and began a new sketch. "It's what anthropologists do. We watch, we record, we analyze patterns." She glanced up. "Want to know what I've learned about you in the past 20 minutes? The unanimous silence was answer enough. "You're all terrified," she said cheerfully. "Not of me, I'm obviously harmless. You're terrified of making the first move because you've finally realized that every time one of your civilizations has faced off against an unarmed human, you've somehow managed to lose." She began sketching again. "The pattern is so consistent, it's practically a law of physics at this point." Mordun's bioluminescent patches flickered in agitation. "We are not afraid of a single academic with outdated writing. Implements." "Of course not," Kessa agreed. "You're afraid of what happens after you attack the academic with outdated writing implements. Because somewhere in your collective unconscious, you've realized that might be exactly what she's counting on." The line on the floor seemed to mock them with its simplicity. Just one small step across a chalk mark, and they could end this farce. Yet none of them moved. Instead, they found themselves studying Kessa with the sort of attention usually reserved for unexploded ordnance. The stalemate shattered when Vextar's patience finally snapped. With a roar that would have impressed a dying star, he charged across the chalk mark, bone spurs extending from his knuckles like organic pile drivers. Kessa sidestepped with the casual efficiency of someone avoiding a puddle, never looking up from her notebook. Vextar's momentum carried him into the far wall, with a sound like a freight train hitting a mountain. "Predictable," she murmured, making a check mark next to his name. "Bone crushers always lead with their dominant limb when frustrated. It's in your warrior caste training manual, page 47. Zek Prime struck next, her blade arms weaving a pattern designed to slice through armored vehicles. Kessa leaned back, forward, then sideways, her movements economical and precise. The Catherian's weapons carved elegant arcs through empty air. "Dance Form 7, Kessa noted, still writing. "Reserved for opponents taller than yourself. You shifted into it the moment you calculated my height-to-reach ratio." Gorth's approach was more subtle. Neural toxins released through his skin, while his tentacles created a hypnotic swaying pattern meant to induce paralysis in prey species. Kessa closed her eyes, held her breath, and began reciting mathematical sequences aloud. "Fibonacci spiral, base 7, she announced to the room. "Breaks the neural pathway disruption your people use for deep-sea hunting. Elementary neurobiology." 3 more species joined the assault simultaneously. Morden phased partially out of visible spectrum. The Zephyrians generated sonic frequencies designed to shatter bone, and the Helix Confederacy representative deployed micro-drones that swarmed like metallic wasps. Kessa pulled a small mirror from her pocket and angled it to reflect the chamber's lights in precise patterns. Morden materialized instantly, his camouflage system overloaded by the unexpected photon feedback. She then produced what appeared to be a dog whistle and blew a single silent note. The microdrones fell from the air like mechanical rain, their programming confused by the harmonic resonance. "Your drones operate on a hive mind frequency derived from your species' original collective consciousness," she explained to the Helix representative, who was staring at his fallen swarm in disbelief. "But you never compensated for how that frequency interacts with subsonic wavelengths. Simple oversight, really." The Zephyrians' sonic attack faltered as she began humming a complex melody that somehow caused their crystalline forms to vibrate in harmony rather than discord. "Music theory," she said by way of explanation. "Your people are essentially living instruments. Play the right tune, and you can't help but join in." What followed was less a combat trial and more an exhibition in applied xenopsychology. Each species employed their most devastating techniques, their finest strategic thinking, their deepest warrior traditions. Kessa countered each attack not with force, but with knowledge so precise it bordered on prophecy. She anticipated the Thundercaller's lightning strikes by 3 seconds, having calculated the bioelectrical buildup patterns in his nervous system. She neutralized the Phase Walker's dimensional shifting by tossing chalk dust in mathematical patterns that outlined his probability matrices. When the Void Singers attempted to weaponize despair itself through subsonic poetry, she responded by reciting tax codes in 7 different languages, creating a bureaucratic ennui that overpowered their existential dread. "How?" Zek Prime gasped between strikes, her blade work becoming increasingly frantic as every attack was avoided or deflected. "How do you know our methods better than we do?" "I don't," Kessa replied, stepping through a combination attack from 4 different angles without apparent effort. "I know the mathematics behind your methods, the cultural evolution that shaped your fighting styles, the psychological conditioning that determines your choices." She paused to make another note. "You know how to fight. I know why you fight the way you do." The chamber had become a chaos of frustrated aliens employing increasingly exotic attack forms, while a single human wandered through their midst like she was taking a leisurely stroll through a particularly interesting museum exhibit. "This is impossible," Vextar bellowed, his bone spurs now fully extended and glowing with bioelectric fury. "No one can predict battle patterns with such precision." "Anyone can," Kessa corrected, ducking under a tentacle strike that would have removed her head. "You just have to stop thinking like warriors and start thinking like scientists." She gestured at the ongoing melee. Every civilization develops combat techniques based on their evolutionary pressures. Bone crushers fight like pack hunters because you evolved from pack hunters. Catherians dance because your mating displays required precise coordination. It's all perfectly logical once you map the cultural DNA. Gorath wrapped 3 tentacles around her legs, expecting to immobilize her. Instead, she began applying pressure to specific neural clusters along his limbs, causing them to release her involuntarily. "Cephalopod nervous systems," she explained. "Touch the right spots, and you trigger autonomic responses. Your own neurology does the work." The assault continued for another 10 minutes, growing increasingly desperate as each species exhausted their traditional approaches and began improvising. This proved to be an even worse strategy, as Kessa seemed to anticipate their improvisations better than their practiced techniques. Finally, breathing hard and covered in the various secretions that passed for sweat among different species, the 12 delegates found themselves standing in a rough circle around Kessa, who appeared completely unruffled and was still taking notes. "Fascinating," she said, reviewing her observations. "In every case when you abandoned formal training and attempted creative solutions, you defaulted to childhood play patterns from your respective homeworlds, evolutionary psychology in action." She looked up at the assembled aliens, her expression that of a professor whose students had just demonstrated an particularly elegant theorem. "Would anyone like to try again? Or shall we move on to the interesting part?" The silence that followed was broken only by the labored breathing of 12 exhausted alien champions and the soft scratch of Kessa's pen against paper. She had filled 17 pages with observations, diagrams, and what appeared to be mathematical formulas that somehow described the precise arc of a Zephyrian death song. "The interesting part," Morden wheezed, his bioluminescent patches flickering weakly. "What could be more interesting than systematic humiliation?" Kessa closed her notebook with a snap that echoed through the chamber like a judge's gavel. "Understanding why you just humiliated yourselves." She walked to the center of the room, stepping carefully around the various weapons, toxins, and mechanical debris scattered across the floor. The chalk line remained visible beneath it all, unbroken and somehow accusatory. "Question," she announced, addressing the room like a lecture hall. "What's the most dangerous thing in the universe?" "Antimatter cascade," Vextar suggested hopefully. "Gamma ray burst," offered the Helix representative. "The heat death of all existence," Gorath added, with the morbid enthusiasm of his species. "Close," Kessa said, "but you're thinking too literally. The most dangerous thing in the universe is a pattern you don't know you're following." She began walking in a slow circle around them, and despite their exhaustion, they all turned to track her movement. Even now, they were responding to predator avoidance behaviors hard-coded into their DNA. "Every single attack you just made was predetermined by your evolutionary history. When Vextar got frustrated, he defaulted to the hunting charge that worked for his ancestors on the savannas of Kethmore. When Zek Prime felt threatened, she fell back on the blade dance that kept her people alive during the Crystal Wars. When Gorath wanted to subdue prey, he used techniques perfected in the deep trenches of his homeworld's ocean floors." She stopped walking and faced them directly. "You're not warriors. You're archaeological specimens acting out behavioral patterns laid down millions of years ago." The hegemony observer pulsed with agitated light. Analysis suggests deliberate psychological manipulation. Exactly. Kessa clapped her hands together like a delighted teacher. Finally, someone gets it. I've been manipulating you from the moment I drew that line. Not through force, not through technology, but through the simple expedient of understanding you better than you understand yourselves. Zek Prime's mandibles clicked rapidly. The line was bait. The line was theater, Kessa corrected. A prop to focus your attention while I gathered data. You see, the thing about studying warfare across cultures is that you eventually realize that nobody really fights the enemy in front of them. They fight the enemy their culture has trained them to expect. She gestured at the scattered chaos around them. Bone Crushers expect enemies who run when charged, so they've perfected the devastating opening assault. Catherians expect enemies who fight back directly, so they've developed perfect defensive counters. Gorith's people expect prey that panics when cornered, so they specialize in psychological dominance. Her smile was the sort that professors wore when revealing that the entire semester had been building toward this one moment. But what happens when you face an enemy who knows exactly what you expect and gives you something completely different? The weight of realization settled over the chamber like a suffocating blanket. They had been fighting their own expectations while she fought them. You never intended to win through combat, Mordoun said slowly. I won before I drew the line, Kessa replied. I've spent 3 decades cataloging the combat methodologies of every known sapient species in the galaxy. Their strengths, their weaknesses, their cultural blind spots. I don't need to beat you in a fight. I just need to make you beat yourselves. She walked back to her chair and began packing her notebook and thermos with the unhurried efficiency of someone whose day's work was done. The really beautiful part, she continued conversationally, is that this encounter will become part of your cultural memory. Future generations of your species will study what happened here today. They'll develop new techniques, new approaches, new ways to avoid the obvious traps. She paused. Which I'll also study, categorize, and eventually predict. Vextar's bone spurs retracted with a sound like disappointed sighs. You're not just an anthropologist. No, Kessa agreed, shouldering her bag. I'm an applied anthropologist. There's a difference. The chamber fell silent except for the hum of environmental systems and the barely audible sound of paradigms shifting. The hegemony observer's geometric forms rearranged themselves into what might have been confusion or admiration. Query: what classification should be applied to human combat methodology? Kessa considered this as she walked toward the exit, stepping carefully over the chalk line that had started it all. At the threshold, she turned back to address the room one final time. Mimetic warfare, she said. We don't fight your bodies. We fight your cultures. We don't defeat your soldiers. We defeat your certainties. She gestured at the devastation around them. Not physical destruction, but something far more thorough. We turn your greatest strengths into exploitable weaknesses by the simple expedient of understanding them completely. She paused at the doorway. Oh, and the Kepler 442 system? Humanity's claim is now legally recognized under the arbitration protocols. Congratulations on your participation in the trial process. As the door sealed behind her, the 12 representatives of the galaxy's most feared civilizations found themselves alone with the wreckage of their assumptions. The chalk line remained on the floor, a thin white mark that somehow contained the entire future of interspecies conflict. None of them had crossed it. All of them had lost anyway. In the end, the most dangerous human weapon wasn't the one that killed you. It was the one that made you kill yourself while thinking you were winning.